Hey everyone, it's Alex, and it has been forever since I filmed a video like this, sitting down and just like talking to the camera and not just vlogging. Everything I've done recently has been vlogs, and as I'm getting back into watching booktube and creating booktube and editing my old videos, I thought the first thing I should do is catch up on all of my monthly reading wrap-ups because I stopped filming those and it would bother me if I didn't continue them at any point. Like, I would like to catch up on all of those, and I was like, okay, that'll be like 3, maybe 4 months. Apparently, the last wrap-up that I filmed was for March. It's now September. So yeah, this is my April reading wrap-up. This was back when the owls were a thing. This was back before that readathon was basically canceled because J.K. Rowling is a trash fire, and we're all the way in September and the world has spiraled out of control, at least in America. So yeah, I read 15 books in April and I remember none of them. So thankfully I do post reviews on Goodreads for everything that I read, so I can just like skim those briefly as I go through this video. So if I'm looking down to my right, that's where my computer is, and I have my Goodreads reviews pulled up for literally every single one of these books because that is necessary. I also don't have many of these anymore. A few were library books, most were ebooks anyway, but like, it's been since March. April. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's been since April. Let's just talk about these books and get it over with so that I can start to talk about what I've read recently and can still remember at any point. The first book that I read in April was How to Save a Life by Sara Zarr. I kind of went through a bit of a Sara Zarr binge this spring. I read a bunch of her books and basically read everything that she'd written because I've read a few of her books before and I had really loved her. So I was just kind of like, let's read them all. Because she writes really great YA contemporaries and I do really enjoy her and her writing style. So I read pretty much all of her books. How to Save a Life is a very strange book. I gave it 3 stars. It is a young adult contemporary about 2 girls. One of them is a pregnant teenager, and one of them is the daughter of a woman who wants to adopt the pregnant teenager's baby. And it's kind of about the way the 3 of them interact and how their lives kind of just collide and like sort of they become a family almost throughout the books. And there's like a lot of clashing between the 2 girls who are very similar age but very different people with very different backgrounds. There are aspects of it that are interesting, but I just wasn't a fan of the story. Like, I love Sara Zarr's writing and I think she's a wonderful writer. I think she has a great sense of place and just a great way of making everything so small and so detailed and so specific to her characters that it feels like you're reading about real people, and that's what I love about her books. But in this book, it was just such a strange premise, and the adoption was, it felt incredibly unrealistic to me and like vaguely illegal. And I don't know anything about adoption, but like there were no lawyers involved. It was kind of just the girl being like, okay, I'll give birth to this thing and then just hand it to you and that'll be legal and great. And it was like, why are the adults going along with this? Like, it was very strange, and I found both of the narrators, the 2 teenage girls, to be kind of annoying. Like, not unlikable in a very interesting way, or like they're interesting characters. I just found them vaguely annoying, and I wasn't super interested in them as people. And I don't know, it was really well written. I do love Sara Zarr's writing. It was just, she does write a fair number of books that are just very much not for me, and just not stories that I enjoy. And this just happened to be a story that I didn't enjoy. The next thing that I read was Once Was Lost, also by Sara Zarr. This is a book about... It's so hard to think of what this book was about, even though like I remember it much more clearly than a lot of the others. This book is about a teenage girl who's the daughter of the town preacher. She spends most of the book struggling with her faith, and at the same time, a girl from the town has gone missing, and they're not sure if she's a runaway or if she's been kidnapped or what is going on in that respect. But despite that as the kind of background, the main bulk of the book is just on this teenage girl and her struggles with faith and what faith means to her and her relationship with her father, who's a preacher, and her mother, who's an alcoholic, and how their lives and their problems have impacted her. And a lot of this book is about religion, which isn't something that I normally gravitate towards in books just because I'm not religious. So, like, I definitely can't speak to it on that front. But I adored every second of this book. It was so well done. It was so beautifully written. I loved the main character. I loved the way it discussed faith, and it discussed what it meant for her, and like how very specific it was. And like, it didn't really matter so much if it was a book where like she was discovering her faith or losing her faith. Like, that wasn't really the point. The point was sort of about the journey and just about her as a person, and like her faith just happened to be a very big part of her. I gave this 4 stars. Like, I was so very close to giving this 5 stars. I don't really remember why I sort of stopped just short, but like, this is a book I'll be rereading and hopefully buying for myself at some point, because it was wonderful. This is one of those books that I would describe as a book that is very much about religion, that very much focuses on religion and faith, but it's not a religious book, and that it's not trying to convert you. It doesn't really matter what your religion is reading it, if you like believe or not. Like, I'm not a religious person, and like the religious aspects like weren't, I'm not gonna say they weren't important, because they were very important to the book, but not in like a preachy sort of way, not in like a we're trying to convert you or we're showing you that this is the right path. It was just like, it's not the right path, it's just this character story and her life, and it was so fascinating. And I loved that the missing persons case was so very present in the book, but it was also very much in the background. It was the secondary story. Like, it was a very important thing, and it influenced the main character's life, but it really wasn't the most important thing in her life. She was a lot more concerned with her mother, who was in rehab, and like what she was going to do if her father figured out that she was questioning her faith. Because like, as the preacher's kid, something she discussed several times throughout the book was that a lot of her friends, if they were having questions or like struggling with their faith, would go to her father to talk to him. But as his kid, she didn't feel like that was an option for her, and she didn't feel like she had anyone that she could turn to. And it was just, I hate that it's been so many months and now I'm talking about it, because like, it's such a beautiful book and I'm not doing it justice. And it was so wonderful. It was one of those books that just made me happy to read, and I can't recommend it enough if you like YA, and especially if you're interested in YA that focuses on religion a bit, because I know there's not like super loads of that in the mainstream, unless you get very specifically into Christian literature or any kind of religious literature, but it's not really a religious book. It's just a book that happens to have religion as a major focus, and I don't know, I love this book so much, and I just talking about it kind of does make me want to reread it. Then, in kind of a different vein, I read a novella. I read Snatched by Karin, which is one of the books in the Will Trent series. It's book 5.5 according to Goodreads. It's just one of those little novellas that she came out with. It's like an ebook only, that I didn't read it when I was originally reading the Will Trent series, but I kind of decided that like I should, just why not? I like those books. I figured the novella wouldn't be too bad. I gave it 3 stars. It's about a kidnapping, and it's pretty, my main complaint was that it was pretty generic. Like, there weren't really any twists or turns. There wasn't really anything dramatic that was happening. It was like, oh no, there's a kidnapping. They figured out who did it. They caught the people. The end. And it was just kind of just, there wasn't enough story, because I think it was only like 60 pages or something. There just wasn't enough time for the story to really develop, or for there to be much of a story at all. Like, and there were so many chase scenes. Like, I swear there were like 15 or 20 pages of just chase scenes, and like, that's not that many when you're talking about like a 300-page book, but when you're talking about a 60-page book, oh my god, there were so many chase scenes, and it was just kind of boring. Like, it wasn't a bad book. It was fine. If you like the Will Trent series and you're reading all of it, you might as well. This will take you like an hour to read. It wasn't bad by any means. I gave it 3 stars. Like, it was fine. It just, like, it didn't feel like it was a real story. It just felt like a very generic crime case. And I don't know. I found it a little bit pointless. Then I read Busted by Karin, which is apparently 6.5. It's another novella, and I gave this one also 3 stars, but I do believe I liked it a little bit more. I'm trying to read my review to see what I thought, because I remember nothing about this. There were some pretty decent twists and turns. Good job, Karin Slaughter. I don't even remember what this one was about. So basically, in this book, Will Trent is undercover in one of his undercover guises that he is in for several of the main novels in this series, and a gas station is held up, and he has to kind of figure out what happened, because a cop is now dead. And I gave it 3 stars. I think I did, as I'm reading my review, I did enjoy it better than the previous novella, because it did feel like it was a story, but it also felt like there was just so much crammed into this little novella that, like, it should have just been a full novel of its own. Like, it could have been. I feel like it was just one of those things where Karin Slaughter had this idea for a book and then just realized that, like, oh, like, this isn't a good enough idea for me to, like, make it a full novel. And then she needed to do a novella for a promotional thing and was like, sure, let's throw it in here. But there was just, like, too much information, like, too many twists and turns, too many characters, like, too much going on, and it felt like it needed to be, like, pared down if it was going to be that short of a story, or it just needed to be lengthened to, like, 250 pages instead of, 70 or whatever it was. But, like, again, not bad. If you like the Will Trent series, you might as well read it, but you're not missing much if you don't. Then I read Five Dark Fates, which is the 4th and final book in the Three Dark Crown series by Kendare. This is a series about it's a young adult fantasy series about 3 sisters, 3 twin sisters. I guess they're triplets, not twins. 3 triplets who are queens. They're all queens, and when they turn 16, they have to fight each other to the death, and whoever survives gets the throne. And they all have specific powers. One of them is like a poisoner, one of them is an elemental, and one of them is a naturalist, which has to do with, like, animals and flowers and stuff. This is the 4th book, so a lot has happened up to this point. I don't want to get into it, partially because of spoilers and partially because I don't really remember anything, because I did start reading the series last November. But I gave this final book 3 stars, and I really do think my main issue with it, which I've talked about a number of times on my channel, because I did review this series, I believe. Or I at least reviewed the first book, it doesn't matter. I'll link it down below. I just read this book I read this series over such a long period of time. I started it in, like, November, and I finished this up in April. And it was just such an elongated experience. By the time I did read this book and finally got through it, it was like I wasn't interested in the story anymore. Like, I'd already kind of fallen out of this world and fallen out with these characters, and I couldn't get that connection back that I felt in books 2 and 3. And that's one of those things that is entirely my fault. Like, it's not the book's fault. Like, that is just a my reading experience kind of thing. And it is disappointing, because I did really, really like the first couple books in this series. By the time I got to the end, I was just kind of done. That really was most of my review. I'm trying to find something else to say about, like, the actual story. I said it felt unnecessarily choppy, which I don't remember, and I said it didn't build up some of the climactic moments enough, and that, like, there were some really big scenes, and none of them felt big until, like, the very, very end of the book. I don't know. I don't really remember any of that at all, but I did give this 3 stars, and I just think I ruined it for myself, honestly, which, like, is not Kendare Blake's fault. I thought it was a good series. I thought it was a fun series. Like, it was one of those series that was just, like, it just grabbed me, and it was just fun and cool, and I just wanted to see where it went, and yeah, I don't know. That was pretty much my thoughts on that. Then I read Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen, which is a memoir of a woman's time in a psychiatric hospital when I believe she was, like, 18, 19, in the 60s. Yes, in the 60s. I'm just looking at my review. I gave this book 4 stars. It's a very famous book. There's a very famous movie. I watched the movie years ago, and I don't really remember it super well, but I did kind of enjoy it. And I read the book not really having any expectations or knowing what it was about, and it was just, I found it fascinating. I found it really well written. It's less like a single cohesive memoir and more like a series of vignettes, just like they each tell, like, a very specific story, so you're getting, like, snapshots of her time in the hospital rather than, like, a single cohesive narrative, which I think some people don't like, and that's the reason why some people just really don't like this book. But I found it really, really wonderful and, like, a fascinating way to tell this story, because it was less like you get, like, that one story, and more like because you're looking at all these snapshots of like what the experience was like for her, you come away from this book with kind of like a fuller picture of what it was like almost. And I really adored that. She also just has this wonderfully graphic writing style where like it's like you can see her experience almost. You can see what's happening to her. And even when she like leaves out information, because she does leave out a whole lot of information and just kind of like brings it in like the periphery of what she's saying, it's like it still feels like you get the whole picture just because she's that good of a writer. And I do think if that kind of thing sounds interesting to you, I would recommend picking it up, but it's definitely don't go into it with the expectation that it's going to be like a very narrative memoir, because it's more like you get these moments, you get these scenes, you get these feelings that she has, but you don't get like the story start to finish. And I really enjoyed it for that, but I do know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I am so glad that I did finally pick this up because I'd wanted to read it for years. Then I read The Music of What Happens by Bill Konigsberg. This was recommended to me by Kaz from Cats and Camera, who I will link down below. This is about two boys who fall in love. It's a YA contemporary. The basic premise is that one of these boys is going to lose his home very soon if he doesn't get this food truck up and running and successful very quickly. And he enlists the help of this other boy in his high school who he doesn't really have much to do with. And then kind of shenanigans happen and they fall in love, as you know, they do in contemporary YA. I gave this book 3 stars, and this was one of those books that I had a lot of issues with, but there were also kind of a number of things I really, really liked. And honestly, this is one that I might do a full review on just because like I do actually remember a lot about this book. But basically the upshot was positives. I really, really loved the romance in this book. I loved the relationship between the two boys. I think it was really well written. I think it was really well developed, and I think it was very realistic in certain ways. It was much too fast-paced for me and happened very, very quickly, and I wish it had been kind of just like the time frame elongated, because they did fall in love in like 2 weeks or something. But in terms of their actual relationship, I thought it was so well done, and like there were many points throughout the book where like they were having problems, like communication issues, or just like they were clashing over something, or just like having problems in general, as relationships do. And they would kind of just like stop and talk about it and deal with the issue and like continue forward. And like they wouldn't necessarily solve the issue completely, but they'd be like, hey, I don't like when you do that thing, it makes me uncomfortable. And the other one would be like, okay, I'll change this thing. And like they would just both make small concessions in their behavior to make the relationship work, and it was just really, really healthy and really wonderful. And like that relationship made the book worth it for me. And I kind of wish it'd been like just a straight romance, because my issues were kind of like everything else in the story. They both had 2 friends, and so like 4 friends total in the book, and they were all the most unbearable people. They were just insufferable. I couldn't stand them. They were like so miserable. The most annoying characters I have possibly ever read. I hated them. I hated every second they were on the page. My other major issue was kind of just like the premise as a whole. This boy is about to become homeless. Like that is literally the issue that they're dealing with, is his impending homelessness. And it felt like that was much too serious a topic for like the overall tone of the book. Because the book was kind of, I don't want to say it was light and fluffy, because like that's going a little too far. But it wasn't like a dark, serious book. It was kind of like middle ground, kind of, in terms of that. Like it dealt with serious topics, but like at the end of the day, it was trying to be like a fun romancy type thing. And like it was trying to be cute, and there was a lot of cuteness and a lot of humor. And like it just seemed like some of the topics in it, like the homelessness, were just like too serious for the tone. And it like I wish it hadn't been trying to be so serious. I wish it had just like kind of embraced the cuter side of it, because I don't think it handled the serious topics quite as well as like they really needed. But it was a fine book, despite my issues. I also didn't really love the writing style. It's like first person present tense, which, you know, I complain about a lot. That's always kind of an issue for me. But like just in general, it was fine. It was good. Like I did love the romance. I think the romance makes this worth reading, and I think it was really, really, it was really sweet. Like I did really enjoy the romance. Then I read Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, also recommended by Kaz, and this I also gave 3 stars. There were things I liked about it and things I didn't. I said I always gave it 4 in the review. I don't know that that's right. I don't think I was ever going to give this book 4 stars. I don't have that fond memories of it. I don't remember it very much, to be honest. The main thing I remember is, like, the tone. And that's what I said in my review. But, like, it was a very, like, it's a contemporary book. But the way it's written and just, like, the tone of it feels over the top. Like, it almost feels a little bit fantastical. Like, it doesn't feel like a very down-to-earth contemporary. And I do much prefer my contemporaries when they're very realistic, very down-to-earth. Like, not necessarily depressing. Because, like, the music of Standing Still wasn't that depressing. I mean, it was a little, but, like, a book doesn't have to be depressing for it to feel down-to-earth. And this book just didn't. It felt like it was constantly just, like, a little bit over the top, a little bit too playful, a little bit too, like, in your face at times. And it just almost had, like, a little fantastical touch to it. And I felt like I couldn't connect with the story or the characters as much. I also just found the podcast itself annoying. I know people like the podcast and people like when there are, like, excerpts of, like, stories characters are writing or podcasts that they're doing, but I very rarely like that. I would rather it just be, like, a fake made up thing, because I'm reading this podcast and I'm like, I don't like this podcast. I don't think this podcast is very good. And it kind of does just, like, ruin the suspension of disbelief when it's like, I don't think this thing they're getting famous off of is very well done at all. And it's just like, I don't know. It makes it hard to really buy into, like, everyone thinks this podcast is the most amazing thing, and I'm reading it like, I don't think it's very good, and it makes it hard to, like, get into the rest of the story. So I'd rather it be, like, left to my imagination almost, so that, like, I can just imagine that, like, this podcast is, like, made up and not ever, like, written down, so it can be the most amazing thing ever. But yeah, when it becomes real, that kind of ruins it a little bit. And I don't know, mostly, like, I remember nothing about this book, which I feel like tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Like, I just didn't connect with it very well. Like, it grabbed me, I read it quickly, I was interested in it while I was reading it, but there was always just, like, something that felt off and something that I couldn't fully connect with. But not a bad book, just, like, maybe I wasn't necessarily the audience for it, because I know a lot of people do love it, just, like, maybe not for me. Then I read the audiobook narrated by Youngdahl for Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling, which I gave 5 stars. It's Harry Potter. This is one of my more favorite books of the series, probably Prisoner of Azkaban and then this one. But I'm not gonna talk about it. I've kind of come to the conclusion that, like, I'm going to mention when I read Harry Potter, because it would bother me not to, because I do like for this to be, like, a complete log of what I've read. But because J.K. Rowling is such a trash fire of a person, I really don't want to, like, contribute to discussing her and her books anymore. So, yeah, I did read this, though. And the next thing I read was Autoboyography by Christina Lauren, which was also recommended to me by Kaz from Cats and Camera. I basically posted on Twitter that I was looking for YA contemporaries, so she gave me a bunch of gay ones, which is great. Read them all. 3 stars again. But this one I did. I think this one was my favorite of the 3. Had some issues with it, but, like, this was my favorite of the 3, and it is the one I remember most fondly. I did, like, this is about a bisexual boy. This is about a boy who is out. I can't remember if he's gay or bi, but he is interested in boys and potentially others. But he's out in his hometown, and then his parents moved to Utah, and, like, it's a very Mormon town. He's not Mormon, but he goes back in the closet because, like, he doesn't want to, like, face any kind of prejudice at school. And then he falls in love with, or not falls in love, but he gets a crush on his TA in his creative writing class, and basically writes a thinly veiled memoir about the two of them falling in love. And the TA is very, very Mormon, very, very in the closet, and there are some issues there. But things I liked about this book, it was well written. Like, it was just, like, one of those things that I read very easily, start to finish, and, like, was consistently interested in it, and, like, never had a hard time picking it up, never had a hard time getting through it. It was just, like, nice. it flowed really well and the writing was really well done. Okay, that's like the only positive thing I have to say. But I feel like that's very positive. Like, it was fun, it was interesting, it helped my attention, the writing was good. It was just like one of those books that was just like solidly done. And like, that's what I want when I'm reading something. But then my issues were like, number one of my pet peeves is when authors write thinly veiled memoirs of their lives and just like pass it off as fiction. And like, oh, it hurt my soul a little bit. That was like the main plot of this book, because like that does annoy me so much. It annoyed me in NCIS when McGee did it. It annoyed me in Bones when Bones did it. Like, just have them write fiction. Like, the people who write these plot lines are writers, so they should know. Like, they're stereotyping themselves. Oh, I will say, it was better done in this book because it actually was like part of the plot, and like that was kind of part of the story. It wasn't just like some gimmicky thing, but it did still irritate me. And the other major issue I had was that the relationship kind of made me a bit uncomfortable at times, not because of the age difference, because they were only like a year or two apart. They were like 18 and 19, or like 17 and 19, or like something like that. One of them was a senior in high school, and then one of them was like a freshman or a sophomore in college, and like that was fine. The issue was that one of them was a TA, and like there was discussion of like him maybe grading the story of this guy that he's dating, and like the power dynamic was off, and it was just so unnecessary. Like, he easily just could have been like a guest speaker in the class or something. He didn't have to have like an official role, and it still would have been the same story. Or he could have been like an older high school student who was just helping that teacher out or something. Like, he didn't have to be a TA. And just I wasn't a big fan of the power dynamic there, because I don't think A, it was necessary, and B, it was like never pointed out in the story. And I've not heard anyone discuss it either when talking about this book. It was just like it did make me just like a little bit uncomfortable. But like overall, it was a solid book, and I do think that like if it sounds like your kind of thing, if you like YA contemporaries, go ahead and pick it up, because I don't think it's bad. Like, it wasn't my favorite thing ever, but it was just like a fun, solid read. Then I read The Lucy Variations by Sara Zarr. This is a YA contemporary about a teenage girl who was a concert pianist. She was tutored from a very young age, privately tutored, didn't go to school full time, played piano as like her main career as a teenager, and was famous for it. Like, she won competitions, she like played in concert halls in front of thousands of people, and like she was kind of getting to the point where she was famous for doing it. And then she walked away, and now her younger brother is the only one in the family who plays piano, and she hasn't touched the piano in years. And it's kind of just about her and her life and her family situation, because she is under a lot of pressure from her family because she walked away, and now she's being like the average high school student, but she's not the average high school student. And I think I gave this book 4 stars. I think one of my favorite things about this book was how it dealt with Lucy and her differences between other high school students, because she's not the average high schooler, you know, and I don't mean that in a, you know, not like other girls kind of way, just like she has had very different life experiences than the average high schooler. Like, she never went to school full time. She made a lot of money doing piano stuff, I believe. I can't really remember that aspect, but like she played in front of thousands of people. She like flew to different countries, like all across the world, to play piano. Like, she's interacted mainly with adults for a lot of her life, and like she thinks nothing of having like a close relationship with an adult. Like, that's something that's normal for her in a way that it's not necessarily normal for other 16-year-olds. And just the way this book was written, it's so everything that I love about Sara Zarr books. Everything in it is so small, and it's all so meaningful without being melodramatic. Like, it doesn't need to be melodramatic, because sometimes it's the small things that hit you the hardest. It's the small things that really do mean the most. Like, when it's melodramatic, it feels kind of like too much. And this almost does feel like it might be a melodramatic story, because it is about like a 16-year-old famous concert pianist, but like it's really not. She's just like a person dealing with her life, and I think the relationships between her and the adults in her life were some of my favorites, whether it was like her brother's piano tutor or like her teachers at school, just because she does tend to gravitate more towards having relationships with adults because that has been her life experience and that's who she's been surrounded by more so than like her peers. It's just she sees adults as her peers, and I think it was really well handled. I think it was a really well done book, and I really did enjoy it. I think this has been one of my favorite Sarah Zarr books. Not as good as Once Was Lost, but probably this one probably falls right after Once Was Lost and Story of a Girl, because it was really well done. And then I read As Many Nows as I Can Get by Shana Youngdahl. This is a YA contemporary romance coming of age type story, basically about this teenage girl and this boy she has grown up with her whole life in her small town. And it's basically about their summer together before they went to college, their relationship, kind of what aspects of it they had, and like it wasn't necessarily a traditional relationship, and then her time in college. And it's told in a non-linear format, like in a painfully non-linear format. Just like snapshots here and there. You'll get like a moment now and a moment like 6 months ago and a moment like 3 months ago and another moment like tomorrow, and it was just like it moved around quite a bit. And I kind of expected that to be my major issue with this book, like the non-linear storytelling, because that's something that I really, really don't like most of the time. That tends to be one of like my least favorite things ever. But that didn't bother me so much in this book. And I think it was because none of the different timelines were trying to tell a linear story. It just all sort of wound up being like bits and pieces and like an amalgamation of those that like created a whole picture rather than telling like one specific story out of order. And I think that was why it worked a lot better for me. Like it wasn't trying to be like you're getting pieces of this story out of order. It was just like there isn't a specific story. Like there isn't a linear story. It's just all these different pieces that make up this main character's life. And I do think that actually worked kind of well for me. But that was kind of the only thing I liked according to this review, and honestly what I remember, which again, not very much. This book, I don't remember much of this book. I didn't connect with this book. I think that was my biggest thing. Like, I didn't connect with the main character. She would be going through a tough emotional time, and I wouldn't feel those emotions. It was kind of like I was reading this, like, clinically from the side without, like, feeling a whole lot of what she was feeling. And, like, I really wanted to. Like, I wanted to, like, feel her pain, and I never could. And I also found the main character kind of irritating, which is fine sometimes, because, like, sometimes an unlikable main character really does make a book. But here, I don't think it was very intentional, or like that she was redeemed necessarily. I just found her quite annoying. And I don't know, like this one I'm having like an extra hard time talking about because I really don't remember anything about this book, like at all. I'd forgotten I read this until I came up on here. So yeah, that pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Another 3-star YA contemporary that I don't really remember. And then we're getting to the very end. There are only 3 more, thank God, because, oh, it's too much. Then I read African Love Stories, edited by Amaata Aidoo. This is an anthology of short stories that are all by female African authors, and they are all about love, the various forms of romantic love, and the various ways in which it impacts life, some in negative, some in positive, just all about romantic love. And it's not a romance collection. Like, I do want to like specify that, because when you talk about like romantic love, sometimes the assumption is always like it's a romance, and like there's romance in this, but it's not like a romance short story collection. They just all happen to focus around romantic love. I don't know, it's hard to like talk about anthologies in a wrap up, because it's just like I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought most of the short stories in here were really good. A few of them were really great. There was like 1 or 2 that I thought were amazing. And then some of them I didn't like at all. And like that's kind of like par for the course when it goes for anthologies. Doreen Bengana's short story in here, I forget what it was called. It's really good. Tropical Fish. Tropical Fish was really good. That was a great short story. I think that might have been my favorite. I thought it was really interesting. There were some other good ones, but it's just like, as a whole, I think this collection is worth reading, worth picking up. You probably won't love everything, but like, you know, when do you ever? in an anthology, but like this one was really worthwhile, I think. Then I read Descender Volume 1 by Jeff Lemire. This is a science fiction graphic novel that I really only read because I needed to like finish something for a prompt for the Owls readathon, and I was on the last day and not going to finish what I was reading. So I picked up this because it was really quick. I gave it 3 stars. I don't really remember the plot very much. It's about this little android boy and like they're running from something and trying to figure out what happened to the androids or like what happened to civilization. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't plan on continuing this series. I read this one. It was fine. I gave it 3 stars. Just graphic novels aren't really my thing, and I do try on occasion to read them, but it's just like I don't absorb pictures as stories as much as I do words. So like when I'm reading this, the pictures are part of the story. They're part of the narrative. But like because I kind of like skim over all the drawings and stuff, it's like I'm only getting like a third of the story through the words, through the actual writing of it. And it's just like you have to be able to like absorb all of it. And I just don't when I'm reading it. But my only other issue was that just like the pacing seemed off. It seemed like it was really fast paced and it like needed to slow down. It just constantly felt like it was jumping ahead to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it was just like, yo, like slow down, like let me read this, like let me let me like get into this situation before we just jump into something new. But like it was fine. So my camera just died with 1 book left, and I had to wait like 30 minutes before I could film the very final book of this wrap up, which is just lovely. Oh, I've forgotten the joys of filming. But the last book that I read in April, which was so very long ago, was Early Sunday Morning, The Pearl Harbor Diary of Amber Billows by Barry Denenberg. This is one of the Dear America books. It's a middle grade historical fiction diary. There are loads of them. There's the Dear America series, there's Dear Canada, there's My Name is America, there's just many. There's also a Royal Diary series. But this one specifically is set around Pearl Harbor. It's just about a girl whose family moves to Hawaii for like a month and Pearl Harbor happens, and it's just like her life and how she's dealing with it and like what happens to her specifically. And I gave it 3 stars. I think I've reread a fair number of these as an adult, and I think a lot of them do hold up. I think a lot of them are still really wonderful. This one I don't think was as good as most of the others have been. It seemed like it is shorter. It is like, I checked the page count against some of the others, and it is actively shorter by a fair amount. But it feels a lot faster paced, and it feels like it doesn't cover as much information, and it feels like I just need more from the story. And I don't feel that way about any of the other ones, even though they're all also, you know, middle grade historical fiction diaries. I just think this one is like a lot shorter and a lot faster paced, and it just needed more time. She also doesn't spend that much time in Hawaii, actually, like over the course of the book. They're in DC for like a good portion of the beginning of the book, and then they're only in Hawaii for like a couple of weeks, and it's just like, I feel like there needed to be more time in Hawaii for this book to work, and I don't know. I didn't love it. It was like fine. Also the epilogue. All these books have epilogues that kind of just like sum up the characters' lives and like what could have happened to these people's lives in the future and like them growing up. And normally the epilogue is just kind of like a whatever type thing, but this epilogue was just, it felt so unnecessarily depressing and just like so negative and just like unnecessarily so. Like it wasn't even about the time period. It was just like, these people died in a car accident and their child was orphaned. The end. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, why would you, well, why? Like, this is a middle grade book. Like, that was unnecessary. But, I don't know. It was fine. I liked it as a kid. I loved this so much as a kid. So, like, it's probably still really good for kids. But I don't think this one holds up to adults quite as well as some of the others do. But it was still alright. So that was everything that I read in April. That I don't remember and that you probably don't care about. Lots of YA contemporaries. This was right when I lost my job in April, and then I got a new job in April, and April was a month of great change for me. That's kind of why I was gravitating a lot towards YA contemporaries, because those are like my comfort zone, and Yeah, that's kind of what I was doing in April. But yeah, I did get a lot read, even if it was a lot of YA contemporaries and a whole lot of 3-star reads. But I still think it was a pretty decent reading month. So let me know if you remember anything that you read in April. 'Cause thank God I keep a very detailed record of what I read, or I wouldn't have remembered at least 2/3 of these books. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you watched this whole very long video, I've forgotten how to be concise apparently in the last 6 months, but yes, thank you for watching, and I will see y'all again soon with my May/June wrap up because I'm combining those two. So keep an eye out for that soon, and I'm saying this now for accountability, so now I have to film it soon. But thank you for watching.